Hello to everyone and a warm welcome to our channel. Today we're going to look at how did I structure my PhD thesis and why I did it this way and not in another way, And the thing to take away from this video is that you should have a kind of a sniff for things that are unraveling in front of you, where you are the main actor of that scene. If you can see where things are heading to, then things becomes a bit easier for you. You can ride that wave. In this first part of the video, we are going to talk about the different kind of topics and techniques that I have tackled during my PhD project. PhD is a kind of, very interesting and, it can be self-motivating, okay? But has some potential pitfall. One of this is the length, the length of the PhD, it's designed to allow you to get to know the subject, get to know the people you work with, establish a very good connection with your supervisor. It's also down to you. It's not just down to your supervisor to make sure that this relationship works. So, it takes some time for this. Then, you need to understand how to operate, starting building things in the lab or learn numerical techniques that evolve rapidly, really rapidly, and after that you start planting some seeds. The fact that in many countries this PhD lasts 3 years, it's no surprise. In fact, many kind of assignments you will be given when you go to work in specific places, for a limited period of time. It's about 3 years. So, these 3 years are enough for you to leave a dent on what you're doing, okay? And these 3 years can be quite a lot of time for, somebody that is there, more or less on his own. You have friends around, colleagues, things, but there could be times in which you feel relatively lonely. I have some specific idea about loneliness, but this is not the right place to get into that. The only thing I can say is that loneliness is inside here. First of all. Then, it can be tackled, this problem, but it's mainly inside our head. Okay? So if you do the right thing with people, with yourself, and, with the stuff you get involved with, you won't feel that much lonely. Okay? Especially during a PhD, there is no way. You have so many things you can, you can't feel that way. So, now back to our main topic, which is what did I do in order to get the structure I have on my PhD thesis? When I started my PhD, all I was interested in was to chase this rabbit. Okay, I could kind of smell it was there, but I didn't know what it was. So I was going around, and then I understood the most probable places where this rabbit could be. And, I was going only there. And it took me, about a year and a half before I started wondering, okay, what kind of structure do I give to my PhD? By that time, I got involved in 3 experimental techniques. I was looking at the flow field inside a capillary tube with something, of micron size, and I spend most of my time doing this But then I also wanted to map the temperature of this tube and of the liquid inside of it. So, I investigated some optical techniques that could give me that information. And, I went for two of them. One was infrared thermography, and another was kind of peculiar technique, which is thermochromic liquid crystals. The same thing that are essentially inside the liquid displays, okay, in our computers, in our mobile phones, and so on. So, I had these three techniques, which, one of which I was actually developing, which was the thermochromic liquid crystals. The others, they were kind of used at macro scale a lot. And micro PAV was on its infancy at the time, and definitely there was no commercially available micro PAV kit out there. So, I was among the first to use it, and for sure to use it in that particular field. So, I had these three horses, running, and I decided to go for publishing work on the application of these three horses to the main topic. And I segmented the main topic in a way that I could get independent papers from each technique. Sometimes there was a little bit of overlap, but mostly independently. And this was very useful. My idea back at the time, when I was doing the experiment, was to get the most out of the time I was spending. And for me, the most was scientific papers, which turned out to be very useful for writing a PhD thesis. But I understood this later. So my primary goal was to publish as many papers as possible during my PhD time. And so I had these three horses, and the PAV went very far. It was not that difficult to set, and it was very productive to use it. And the infrared thermography, we had to borrow a camera from an institution in England, and it was not available all the time. So when he was coming for a month, I had planned everything, really, down to the day. And usually I will finish earlier than I planned to. And then, I will lend that kit to other people inside the department which wanted to try out in their experiment. And finally, there was this, thermochromic liquid crystals. This was not very productive. I spent a good amount of effort, and also, I had to buy new kits and, learn how to use color cameras and, do image processing using MATLAB and things like that, And I could, in the end, manage just an experiment on it. And, I kind of concluded it, and, that was then a paper, which then became also a chapter of my thesis. So, now, let's say I have enough material. I am about, almost the end of my second year, and I have enough material. I can feel it, okay, by the thickness of, the papers I wrote, a couple of which were already, published. I could feel that, I had the thickness of the material to make, to write a thesis. And this was surprising for me too. And now is the time that we get to the core of this video. I'm going to show you also with some picture of the thesis outline and the chapters, how I did them. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of looking at the layout of the chapters, things, at the end of my second year, I said to my supervisor that, I had enough material that, I needed to post-process all this huge amount of data, and, probably, I will finish quite earlier than, the end of the third year of the PhD, It took a few days to respond to that, and then, he came and said, there are some regulation in university, you can't get your PhD before, 2.5 years. So, you need special permission to do this, and I then agreed with him that, I will add another strand to my PhD work, which was a little bit of numerical work. This kind of numerical work in my thesis was completely missing. It was purely experimental. So I had kind of taken on the challenge and said, okay, I'll do something about it. And I learned, how to use a code that a friend of my PhD supervisor had, written and developed from some specific application, and I took it on, and I basically modified a little bit with his help, and then used it for some particular cases that I had experiments data for, and we kind of validated the code and then extended it to things that we couldn't do it experimentally. Good. Now at this point I have 4 strands, or 4 horses. I have micro PAV, thermochromic liquid crystals, infrared thermography, and some numerical studies. And this was more than enough. Then it came, how do I put all of these things together? So far they kind of developed in parallel. There's been some overlapping here and there, but most of the paper I published and I was writing, they could stand alone. Okay, and so I asked myself, what about if I take each of this subject, each of this technique that I have applied to the same subject, looking at it from different angles, and then, put them one after the other as chapters themselves. Okay, and all I have to do then is to sew through it, these 4 chapters, and maybe having, some preliminary chapters and an end chapter to conclude. It seemed very reasonable, and also quite natural to go this way, because this is the way my work developed, and therefore, I had already read many PhD theses that we got, most of which we got from the States at that time. There was a particular thesis that the layout of I liked. Okay, so I adopted that layout, and for each of this chapter I wrote, I had particular structure that I'm going to tell you now. So I had the first paragraph, which was a page and a half, sometimes 2, of motivation. why do I need this technique for my project? What this technique is bringing to my topic? Why this technique and not another? Okay, so this was about motivation. And then, I had another part after this kind of introduction to every chapter. And this part was about the background. Yeah, I need to explain what the technique is about, how to use it, what are the limitations, how I adapted it to the particular case. So this is much more than just, some of the experimental technique section of a paper. Here I have to also describe some of the things that didn't work, and there were a few things that didn't work. Then, I will go on and make a layout of the experiment I did with that particular technique. So this was the third paragraph. And here it just, see, we are preparing for giving the results section. So, these three sections can be quite substantial, maybe, 10, 15 pages, sometimes, especially when it comes to PAV or micro PAV, which was, the most complex of the techniques that I used. And so I explain the layout of the experiment, and each time it would be different, because I was tackling a different angle of the same topic. Then I will have the results and analysis section. In the same section, I will present first my main results, and then, try to give a reason why I got these results and others. Okay? And after this, I will kind of conclude on that particular chapter. So the conclusion would be, maybe half a page, 1 page. Okay? And on each chapter, I'll give the reference. Why I give the reference to each chapter and not to the end of the thesis? It's quite obvious. If I write some papers on that particular technique, and I'm going to write a chapter now on that technique, in the paper that I wrote, there are references. And therefore, those references will go in the reference of this chapter. It's natural, Good. Then, I did the same for all the chapters. So I start writing my thesis, from the chapter which were linked to the experimental techniques and also the numerical work I did. Why did I not start from the, talking about the topic in general and, introducing the subject of my PhD thesis? Well, because I had already done this in the introduction section of the papers. So when I arrived then to write up these 4 chapters, then I looked to conclude the thesis by adding 2 chapters before and 1 after. The one after, it's the conclusion of the whole thesis. And some hints about what other could do after me. And the first 2 chapters was one about, the real bigger picture that motivated my work. And at the time, the bigger picture was microelectronic cooling. It was big push for liquid cooling at the time, which took some years to come true then. So at the time there were things like heat pipes, liquid cooling, and they took some time to come to the real world, from the labs. And that's what was my first chapter. Then after that, because I wasn't going to take one of these systems and use it, but I was going to idealize the evaporation inside the pores of one of these systems. Then, I took an ideal transparent tube with some liquid that I filled the tube with, and I had to explain in the second chapter what this is about, who else did this in the past, what do I bring, to the plate, and and overall explain and justify all the time I spent, for investigating this topic with these particular techniques and not others. Now we come to the last part of this video, and I should say that I had also 2 extra small chapters at the end of my PhD thesis, and they went into the appendixes. Why? Because they were not kind of core work of my PhD, but I did them indeed. One of which was a collaboration with one of the companies that inspired my PhD thesis, and we even published a paper on this too. And they went like 2 appendixes, and I had to also justify why they were there. They were linked. They were quite well linked, but they didn't do in the main thesis. Now, what are some kind of advice and some kind of tips I can give? Well, first of all, you need some vision. Definitely. In a PhD project, you need vision. Without vision, you risk to derail a number of times. You can still finish, but the likelihood of you using a lot of energy, it's very high. So if you have vision, it's like a lighthouse. It's always over there, Every now and then you look at it, you're going to make it. Maybe the path is not going to be straight line, you have to go around. But you know that this is what you are attracted by. Then you need some good planning and some hard working too. But don't think of being a farmer. The more you work as a farmer, the more the land produces. No, this is not the way you do PhDs or other intellectual type jobs. You are there to make a dent, to leave a dent into the know-how. And to do this, you don't do just by plowing the ground with a plow, No, you don't do it this way. You need to be watchful and read a lot. But when you read, for instance, read with this eye, critical eye. Why these guys have done it this way and not in another way? So, if you find something peculiar, ask yourself, why these guys have chosen to do it this peculiar way? And little by little, what you do is you start having your own peculiar ways to solve problems, And this is what gives you a big advantage. Then, you also need some planning. So if you have a kind of a plan, to get to the lighthouse, maybe, it's going to take you some effort. You need to avoid some storms sometimes on the way. But with the plan, there is a very high likelihood you're going to get up. You need to be flexible to accept changes to the plan. You need to be flexible also to accept that sometimes you can't make things. And when that happens, you need to be flexible enough to be able to switch to another thing. Before you switch to another thing, practically, you need to switch mentally away from that path which is leading to a dead end. Okay? So switching to another thing comes first inside here. If you switch inside here, then the switch, leaving a particular piece of kit of experiment, and moving to another one, it's less painful. Okay? And then, the critical thing, obviously, it's nurturing a healthy relationship with your supervisor. It's, like with your partner, it's sometimes, it's a bit harsh. Okay, sometimes it's a bit, feels a bit unnatural. However, there is night and day. Day is longer than night in most parts of the world, not in all, but in most parts of the world it's like this. So take it a bit philosophically. Your supervisor has been there before you, so in theory he or she should be able to guide you. Okay, and try to be flexible with this kind of relationship because it's pivotal to your success in the PhD. And when it comes to thesis, don't start reading theses of other people in the last few months. Okay, why? Because if you have read things like I did, I read about 7 theses, of which I think I cited 4 or 5 in my own thesis. So when you read PhD thesis of others, you understand how has been probably put together, if the person has had troubles or not, and how they solve these issues. Okay, then it will give you also some idea about layout. As I said, I took the layout from the inspiration I had from one guy in the state that made a thesis on a subject close to mine. All of these pieces allowed me to build my puzzle. And in my puzzle, there were 3 letters in the hand. Okay? And I've been extremely proud of having reached that step in which eventually I saw these 3 letters. And now what we can do for next time, which will be the last of the 4 episodes on the writing the PhD thesis, is we're going to investigate some of the potentially difficult times that PhD students will have during the writing up of the PhD thesis, and how you can put in place some actions to mitigate those, and in the end graduate, because this is actually the lighthouse. Thank you for watching.